I left my apartment at the usual hour, steering my truck out of the parking lot and onto the familiar road. With a quick U-turn, I made my way down Cortez Street, stopping at the intersection with Monte Vista before taking a left. If everything went as planned, I'd be at work in about 20 minutes. Being a regular Friday with no unexpected twists, I had my mind set on leaving early and heading to the lake. My tent and gear were packed neatly in the back of my truck. All I needed to do was swing by for some ice. Reaching over, I switched on the radio, tuning in just in time to catch Daniel Carter crooning the cold hard truth. As the song faded, the DJ chimed in with his signature enthusiasm. No one does it better than OL Possum. Now, over to Lisa for the latest traffic and weather updates. Lisa's soothing voice reassured me that traffic wouldn't be an issue on my route, and that the weekend promised warm, sunny skies. After enduring a string of commercials for services I had no intention of using, the DJ returned, announcing, "Good morning, the 7:06 on this beautiful Friday, June 9th. You're listening to KXYZ. Here's Rhonda Vincent with a ride on the Bluegrass Express." That morning's calm routine was the last bit of normalcy before everything began. It all started with a business trip to Chicago. I'd kissed my wife, Monica, goodbye and promised to call as soon as I reached the hotel. The flight was smooth, and after catching the shuttle from the airport, I checked into my room and phoned Monica to let her know I'd arrived. Settling in, I unpacked the documents I needed for the client meeting scheduled for the next day. Around 7 p.m., I decided to grab dinner at the hotel restaurant. After a decent meal, I wandered to the lobby, drawn by the sound of live music. A vodka tonic in hand, I relaxed at the bar when a raspy voice startled me from behind. "Hey there, sweetheart, want to have some fun?" I turned, surprised, and found myself face to face with Paula Hopkins. She had been my college girlfriend for 2 years, during which we'd shared more than our fair share of wild moments. Our relationship ended amicably, or so I thought, when she confessed her desire to experience life with other people. Her words echoed in my mind as if they had been spoken yesterday. "I really like you, Matthew, but I was a virgin when we met, and I want to live a little before I settle down." Back then, I had been toying with the idea of proposing, but her confession dissolved that notion faster than I could imagine. Later, I heard rumors about her reputation on campus, which only solidified my decision to let go. And now, 15 years later, here she was, standing before me in a Chicago hotel bar. She hugged me tightly and said, "Matthew, it's so good to see you." Before I could process the encounter, she insisted I join her and her husband at their table. I hesitated, but Annette wasn't one to take no for an answer. Grabbing my hand, she led me across the bar, whispering, "You don't have to mention how I greeted you. Jack wouldn't understand." As we reached their table, she introduced me to her husband, Jack, and we spent the next hour reminiscing about college days and catching up. Jack excused himself to use the restroom, and Annette leaned in, lowering her voice. "Why did you let me go, Matthew?" she asked, her tone almost regretful. "Let you go?" I replied, surprised. "As I recall, you made that decision on your own when you decided to explore other options." She sighed. "Biggest mistake of my life," she admitted. "You were the best, and I didn't even know it." "Thanks for the compliment," I said, unsure of how else to respond. Annette smiled wistfully. "It's true, you know. Jack's a sweetheart, but let's just say he doesn't exactly set the bar in certain areas." Our conversation was cut short when Jack returned, and we shifted to more neutral topics. Soon after, Annette's phone buzzed. She chatted briefly before turning to me. "Do you remember Emily Grace Foster? She's hosting a party tonight. Want to come along?" I agreed, albeit reluctantly, and mentioned needing to grab something from my room first. Annette asked if she could tag along to use my bathroom, complaining about paper napkins in the ladies' room. As we rode the elevator, she giggled. "I hope no one sees us," she said, glancing at her husband. Jack rolled his eyes. "It'll look worse than it is, I'm sure," he replied dryly before leaving us to retrieve the car. In the elevator, Annette leaned close. "Good thing I love my husband, or I might just follow through on my earlier suggestion," she teased. I laughed it off, knowing she was joking, or at least hoping she was. Yet, the memory of our past lingered, stirring feelings I thought I'd buried. As Monica untied me, she leaned in with a mocking grin and said, "What you just witnessed, baby, is exactly what I'll do every single time you decide to cheat on me. Honestly, I almost hope you do it often. It was incredible, and I could definitely get used to it if I allowed myself." Once the ropes were off, I tried to stand, but the hours of being bound so tightly had left me stiff and unsteady. My legs wobbled beneath me, and I nearly collapsed, barely managing to grab the chair for support. "Come here, Ethan," Monica said, patting the bed. "Let's sit and talk." Ignoring her, I stumbled toward the bathroom but didn't make it far before my legs gave out, sending me to the floor. Monica rushed over, but I snapped at her, my voice sharp and unrestrained. "Stay away from me." I forced myself back up, made it into the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. The icy sting jolted me just enough to regain some balance. After drying off, I walked out of the bathroom, through the bedroom, and headed for the stairs, determined to leave. Monica followed closely, her voice trailing me. "Where are you going?" "We need to talk, Ethan. We need to work this out." I ignored her pleas, went straight to the living room, and grabbed the suitcase and briefcase I had dropped when I first came home. Without a word, I walked out the door. Standing in the doorway, she called after me. "Ethan, this isn't going to solve anything. Come back. We need to talk." Her voice faded as I backed out of the driveway and turned onto the street. I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly for a bit before finding a motel close to my workplace. After checking in, I set a wake-up call for 6 a.m. and collapsed onto the bed. Though sleep didn't come easily. It was restless, broken by flashes of anger, confusion, and disbelief. The motel's wake-up call came all too soon. I showered, dressed, and headed to a nearby village inn for breakfast. As I ate, I mentally listed everything I needed to take care of. By 8 a.m., I had called my boss to let him know I was back in town but needed the morning to handle some personal matters. By 9 a.m., I had drained our joint bank accounts and cleared out the safety deposit box. Walking down the street, I opened new accounts at a different bank and rented a new safety deposit box there. By 10 a.m., I had canceled all our shared credit cards, keeping only the ones solely in my name. I called Monica's office, asking to speak to her. The moment I confirmed she was at work, I hung up. By 11 a.m., I had gathered everything I needed to get by for the next few weeks and headed to the office. Olivia, the secretary, handed me a stack of messages, most of them from Monica. I sorted through the slips, tossing hers into the trash without hesitation. "Olivia," I said firmly, "Monica and I have separated. Please don't take any more messages from her or forward her calls to me." She nodded sympathetically, and I walked into my boss Liam's office to give him a rundown of the Chicago trip. Afterward, I mentioned needing some time off to find a new apartment and move. Liam raised an eyebrow. "Can you hold off on that for a couple of days? I need you to handle a situation in Atlanta. You'll probably be gone for 4 or 5 days. "That's fine," I replied. In truth, I welcomed the excuse to leave town and avoid whatever Monica might try next. By the time I walked out of Liam's office, I knew Monica wouldn't have access to any of our accounts or credit cards. She wouldn't be able to reach me at work either. And by the time she figured out what was happening, I'd be airborne, on my way to Atlanta. I told both Liam and Olivia not to inform Monica of my departure. Afterward, I returned to the motel, packed up my things, and headed to the airport. While waiting for my flight, I picked up a free housing magazine and jotted down a list of apartments to check out once I returned. Halfway through the flight to Atlanta, it hit me. I had forgotten something important. Using the in-flight phone, I called Liam and asked him to stop my direct deposit and hold my paycheck until I could transfer it to my new accounts. During the call, Liam mentioned something that didn't surprise me. "Monica called earlier," he said. "When Olivia wouldn't connect her to you, she demanded to speak to me. She tried to convince me to force you to answer her calls, but I told her we don't get involved in personal matters." Then I hung up. When I arrived in Atlanta, I checked into a hotel and finally got a good night's sleep. The next day, After resolving the issues at the Atlanta office, I called my family, my parents, my brother George, and my sister Mary, to let them know about the separation. I kept it brief, simply stating that I had come home early from a business trip and seen something I couldn't accept. My mom mentioned that Monica had called her, asking her to tell me to call her back. Naturally, I didn't. The information I gave the private investigator about Steve, along with my descriptions of the other 3 men from that night, turned out to be incredibly useful. I had asked him to tail Steve and see if he was meeting up with anyone matching those descriptions. If he found them, I wanted every detail he could gather. The results exceeded my expectations. Steve had indeed been meeting with 3 men who perfectly matched the descriptions I'd provided. Luck was on my side when the investigator spotted Steve at a sports bar with the trio. He managed to take a seat close enough to overhear their conversation. As they talked, the group casually reminisced about that night and discussed plans to do it again. Unfortunately, the investigator missed whether they set a date. He had stepped outside to call for backup and continue following the men after they left the bar. The operation was costly, but it was worth it. I now had their names, addresses, and workplaces. With this information in hand, I started making plans. Took me 3 months to organize everything. I chose to drive instead of flying. Planes leave a trail that's too easy to track. To avoid stopping at gas stations, I carried extra fuel in cans. By the time Monday morning rolled around and I returned to work, I had the satisfaction of knowing Eric Walker wouldn't be using his equipment anytime soon. A cast iron pipe has a way of delivering permanent lessons when applied repeatedly to a man's groin. According to reports, a hooded figure ambushed Bowen in the parking lot outside his home, beating him nearly unconscious and taking his watch, wallet, and everything else in his pockets. 3 weeks later, Archie Mellon and Adam Caldwell suffered similar fates. On my 3rd trip, Brian Tate must have figured out what was connecting these attacks. He packed up and moved to another state, vanishing before I could get to him. It was a disappointment, but 3 out of 4 wasn't bad. I considered hiring the detective to track Norm down, but decided against it. 5 months passed. Work was going smoothly, and I was settling into my new life. I spent more time by the pool and got to know a few women who lived in the complex. One of them, Rachel, a flight attendant, quickly became more than just an acquaintance. She and I had an arrangement that worked for both of us. Whenever she wasn't flying or visiting her parents, she was in my bed. The situation was ideal until Rachel dropped a bombshell. She was getting married to one of the airline captains she frequently flew with. I suspected that when she wasn't with me, she was with him during their layovers. As a parting gift, Rachel introduced me to another flight attendant, Vanessa. Vanessa made her intentions clear from the start. She wasn't interested in anything serious and preferred a no-strings-attached arrangement. That suited me just fine. Although I felt a pang of disappointment after losing Rachel, I quickly moved on with Vanessa. Things were going well until one Tuesday evening, when I pulled into my apartment parking lot and heard a familiar voice. "Hello, Ethan." I froze and turned around. There she was, Monica. I stared at her, stunned. "Surprised to see me?" she asked with a small smile. "Not surprised. Disappointed," I replied bluntly. "I was really hoping I'd never see you again. I thought the way I left made that clear." "Maybe it would have been clearer if you'd filed for divorce," she countered. "The fact that you didn't gave me hope that we could work things out." "There's no chance of that, Monica. What you did ended everything between us." "How can you blame me after what you did?" she snapped. "I don't even know what you think I did," I said, exasperated. "Don't play dumb, Ethan. I called your hotel room and a woman answered. She told me who she was and even giggled when I told her I was your wife. She said I was the lucky one to have such an amazing guy all the time. Then she hung up. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to talk to me first," I said, my voice rising. "Instead, you arranged a—" "Exactly," she interrupted. "I wanted to teach you a lesson. Annie wasn't in my room, Monica. She and her husband were waiting to take me to a party. She'd had a few too many drinks and was probably being playful when you called. That's all." Monica's face flushed with anger. "Don't lie to me, Ethan. She told me she knew about your, you know, She knew because Annie was my girlfriend in college, I explained, barely keeping my composure. But that was years ago, and she's married now. You could have figured all this out if you'd bothered to ask instead of jumping to conclusions. Why didn't you file for divorce then? She demanded. It was in my best interest to wait, I said. If I'd filed before leaving, I'd have had to split everything we owned. Now, the only thing left to divide is the house, and there's barely any equity in it. Monica's voice softened. I don't care about any of that, Ethan. I love you. I need you. Well, that's too damn bad, I said coldly. Because I don't want you anymore. Her face paled. I swear, Ethan, it was just that one time. I've never done anything like that before. Once was enough, I said firmly. And from the way you handled everything that night, it sure didn't seem like your first time. Her voice cracked. Ethan, please. It's over, Monica, I said, turning and walking away. Monica moved to Atlanta shortly after, somehow securing an apartment in my complex. She left notes under my door nearly every evening, inviting me to dinner, drinks, or just to talk. I ignored them all until one particular note stopped me cold. It read, "We both love sex, but I haven't had any since." Well, you know when. How about a friends with Liamfits arrangement? Or skip the friends, just neighbors with benefits? What do you think? I spent the night mulling it over, but by morning, I shook my head and muttered, hell no. Picking up the phone, I made a mental note to call Vanessa when her flight brought her back to town. Then I turned on the radio and let Toby Keith remind me why life was better with a cold beer and a bar stool.